Hello. So today I've decided to do a little experiment with a simple biscuit recipe I had found on allrecipes.com. It's pretty straightforward. It has your basic ingredients. It has 2 cups of all-purpose flour, which is your basic structure of your biscuit. It has a cup of milk, which also helps add to the tenderness. It also adds the liquid aspect of your biscuit so that the dough stays together when it cooks. You've got your leavening agent, which is a tablespoon of baking powder, which helps make the biscuit rise. Make it nice and fluffy. That fluffiness that we love. We have a teaspoon of salt, which also helps strengthen the structure of the gluten molecules inside the biscuit. You also have a tablespoon of sugar back here, which is just one of those things that adds to flavor. Helps make it taste more tasty. And then last but not least, you also have a third cup of your shortening, which is the same idea. Also adds a moisture to the biscuit, helps make it nice and savory, albeit it makes it a little less healthy for you, but whatever. So the basic recipe is you added your flour, your baking powder, your salt, and your sugar all together, to which then you added in your shortening, which you mixed together until you got a coarse, grainy sort of meal. To which then you added in your cup of milk till you got a nice dough. So you got a nice sticky dough, to which then you kneaded and formed into your little biscuits, and you baked at 425 degrees for 15 minutes. And this is the result that you get. Nice fluffy biscuit. Nice and delicious. So this is where I started to experiment. So I decided to add or omit a few different ingredients from it just to see what would happen to the actual biscuit structure. So what I decided to do is, for one recipe, I did not add shortening. For another recipe, I decided to use baking soda instead of baking powder. And the third recipe, I decided to add no salt, but I also switched out your all-purpose flour for bread flour, which has a higher protein percentage than all-purpose flour. So if you notice on the biscuit where I didn't add shortening, it kind of has it's really dense feeling. It's got kind of like a hard, tacky scent to it, like the bread they used to make back in the Civil War era, and it's really dry feeling. Like, it just doesn't seem that appetizing to me. Now you have the biscuit with the baking soda instead of the baking powder, and this biscuit, it seems like a little flat, and it seems a little overdone. Like it's more spread out than it did rise, which makes sense because baking soda is one of those. It is an ingredient that needs an acidic environment to start working, so it can create. So the bicarbonate can create the CO2, which causes the bread to rise. Baking powder doesn't need that. It has the crystalline structure and the acid added to it, so that it doesn't need this acidic environment to produce CO2 bubbles. Well, since this isn't an environment where anything is really acidic, it wasn't able to really rise or do much of anything, so it kind of just became cooked and it didn't really rise or anything. So now the third one, which is where I use the bread flour and no salt, it seems this looks more like a fritter than it actually does like a biscuit. It seems that it blew out a lot, which I can understand because bread's meant to rise. If a bread flour is supposed to is made to rise a lot, as opposed to like an all-purpose flour, which can be used for basically anything. So this, along with it being really oblong shaped, it also is kind of seems that it's grown out of proportion. And I understand that salt actually helps strengthen the gluten structure and also strengthen the actual rising and the infrastructure of the overall bread. So without that salt in there, it can't really rise, so it gets kind of these weird, growths, so to speak, so it doesn't rise in a uniform fashion. So now I've noticed that actually it really does matter what ingredients you use at what certain times. Like I always thought that baking powder and baking soda were interchangeable. Well, obviously you get two completely different results if you use, baking soda instead of baking powder. I also realized that there actually is a big difference when you add something as simple as shortening to it, of the big difference that it can create from there. And even your choice of flour can totally alter the results of something, as from make it from a biscuit then creating this conglomeration here. So it's kind of interesting. Now, in these bowls, I didn't mix any of these ingredients. I didn't mix any of them in the same bowl. I used completely separate bowls, completely clean utensils. I used different baking sheets for each one, except for this one, which I just sat everything on because they were already finished baking. Didn't handle any raw. There were no raw meats to be handled. There wasn't anything. Used clean hands, and afterward, cleaned all this place up. Kind of was a lot of dishes to go through, but it's all fine and dandy now. So there you have it. Hope you make some biscuits sometime soon.